What's going on, everyone? So, according to rumors, and again, always take these rumors with the smallest grain of salt because nothing is concrete until it's concrete. But based on the word on the street, looks like Scream 7 won't follow the requel trend and pass the torch once again to a new generation. The story will follow Sidney and Gale at this point in their lives, setting up their story for this film and beyond. New characters will be introduced, but not as the focus. So, again, take this stuff with a grain of salt, but this seems to kind of be the general consensus. That this upcoming Scream movie is going to be very Gale and Sidney focused, Gale and Sidney centric. Yes, Sidney's family will be in this movie and be involved, but in a very limited role. That Mark Kincaid is going to be very limited in this film. Her children are supposed to be very limited in this film. That there will be other characters involved, but none of them will be the established characters like a Sam and Tara that they're kind of growing and developing and trying to create as the next wave, right? From the moment that they went and brought Sidney back, there was rumors going around that they want to do a trilogy, that this is going to be the new beginning of a new trilogy centered around Sidney Prescott and Gale Weathers and kind of their older age and kind of the next wave of a trilogy, which personally, I don't really like. If this is true, again, it's a little disappointing. Now, look, I love Sidney. I love Gale. I grew up with Scream. It's my favorite horror franchise. I've built this channel on the back of Scream, right? Like, I love Sidney Prescott. But one thing that I see a lot of is people want Sidney to have a happy ending. How can Sidney have a happy ending if she's constantly being thrusted into the world of Ghostface? 2, how can her family constantly be safe and okay and not be in jeopardy and not one of them die or anything when they're constantly being thrusted into Ghostface? 4 or 3, like, again, how many times can Sidney go off by herself to face Ghostface while Mark Kincaid just sits at home with the kids, right? At what point do you as a husband feel like you need to get involved and help out? 4, at what point does Sidney just die, right? Like, I mean, the fact that Sidney has been alive to this point is a big testament to her character. Because historically speaking in horror franchises, the final girl usually dies by this point. And, you know, you're going to keep having Sidney. At what point does it become unrealistic? At what point does it become silly? How many people want Sidney dead? How many people are coming out of the woodworks? Now, if you can tell a convincing... The only way I see this really working, in my opinion, is if you set up a grander story. So it's not necessarily a... here's a killer going after Sidney and her family... And that's that. Oh, here's the next movie. Here's a killer going after Sidney and her family. And that's that. Oh, here's the killer going... You know what I'm saying? Like, where each movie is kind of like its own thing. The only way I see this really making sense is this is kind of chapter 1 of a 3-chapter film. Where this film is the establishment and setup of, say, like a Ghostface cult or something like that. This is an establishment setup. Here you go. Here's Ghostface. Here's this grand scheme. And then here's the reveal at the end of, like, what is to come. And then part 2 is kind of the middle. And then part 3 is kind of the end in which all the chaos ensues. And then that's the farewell saga for Sidney. Right? Because if this is just, you know, a Scream... 4 or 5 and 6 and all over again, just doing this, only this time it's with Sidney and Gale. Again, I'm never going to say no to Sidney and Gale. I love it. Right? Like, to get that dynamic duo, you know, the Bonnie and Clyde, like, let's go, right? The two of them teaming up together to take down Ghostface. They don't have Dewey anymore, so all they really have is each other, right? Like, I'm all for it. Right? These two girls have been the face and fixture of Scream from the beginning, right? They're both the final girls. Gale's been in more films than Sidney's been at this point. So I love me some Gale. I love me some Sidney. I've repeatedly said and will continue to say, I think Gale has had the best story arc, character growth out of any of the characters in Scream, including Sidney, right? I'm all for it. But at what point does it become repetitive? What point does it become redundant? If this is just every movie is its own Scream film against Sidney Prescott, it gets old after a while. Right? It's like, how many of her family members or how many of her, people in her lives want her dead? At what point so to me, it's just like set up some grandiose thing. Have this whatever cult targeting Sidney. Sidney's got a battle against the first wave. Then it's revealed that like, oh no, this is just the beginning. And now she's got to prepare. And now you have kind of these three parts, these three sections. And you're telling this more grand scheme as opposed to just like this simple, straightforward film. Right? Like, I'm even okay. End it on a cliffhanger. Right? Like all that. I'm okay with that. I don't want to get into the repetitive nature of Scream. Like one of the things that I love about Sidney, about Scream, not Sidney. One of the things that I love about Scream is it's always someone different, right? You can do a different story each time. And when I say I don't want the repetitiveness of Scream, I don't mean the simplistic storyline, right? If you break it down to like a finite point, right? It's essentially whodunit mystery with a mass killer that has some meta sprinkled in, and then the big killer reveal, right? It's a formula, a very simple formula that can just easily be implemented. I'm okay with that simplicity. I've even said keep it simple, go back to basics. What I mean of the repetitiveness, right? Not the general idea, but the characters in which you are using to get that idea across, right? I want to see, at some point, I want us to move off of Sidney Prescott. At some point, I think it's necessary. At some point, you got to go a different direction if you want to keep making these films. And they clearly want to keep making these films. And I've talked about it since Scream 5, since before Scream 5 came out. The reason they want to keep making these films is because they spent $500 plus million on the rights to Scream. Now, it wasn't just Scream. It was Scream and a whole catalog of things, but Scream was the grand prize, right? Scream was the big draw. It'd be like if I was to sell you, a box of cards and, but one card is, the grand prize card. This card's worth, $100,000. But it's like, hey, if you want this card, you got to take all these other cards for, $150,000. It's like, well, I don't want those cards, right? Like, but okay, maybe I can recoup everything, right? The real prize is that one card, right? But all the other cards are you're hoping to just kind of make something off of, right? So that's basically what they're doing with Scream. Scream is that $100,000 card that, if you can, you keep, now you keep flipping over and over and over again, and you're going to make your money back and then some, right? So they keep pumping out movies. They're going to make their money back and then some. But they're going to need several more films, right? Yeah, each film made, a couple $100 million, which is great to see. But after, they're probably not even halfway to what they've spent yet. So we're definitely, in my opinion, getting another 3-4 films. And it's obvious, considering that, Sam and Tara, Melissa and Jenna, they left, they departed, and you had all that controversy and everything. And then even after the Sidney stuff and all that, and they're still giving you a movie. And they were able to convince Sidney to come back. Again, I'm all for it. Give me some Sidney, give me some Gale. I get it. I understand this film. I do. I get it with this film, right? Yeah, you had an unexpected turn, where you essentially lost what you were anticipating your next film to be. So it's like, instead of just starting from ground zero and trying to rebuild, right? Like, we have the foundation here that's been proven to work. Let's keep that, right? Safest route is to bring Sidney Prescott in. The safest route is to get her back and use her as kind of the catalyst for this film going forward. Okay, fine. I'm all for it. You got me bought in on this one. But if this is something where it's like, okay, doing another Scream film, this time, instead of it being, the babysitter, it's the nanny, right? Like, okay. Again, it's just, at what point do things have to start happening? At what point does Sidney have to die for it to finally start making sense? You know, how can Sidney have a happy ending? Which I've even said, this is a horror franchise. Not everyone gets a happy ending in a horror franchise. Keep that in mind. You know, even if somebody deserves that, this isn't a rom-com. This isn't some, drama series. No, it's a horror franchise. Not everyone gets their happy ending in the end. So just something to keep in mind. But if they ever were going to do the happy ending route, how do you do that when you have a character that just through natural just trauma is probably going to meet their end at some point? It just, again, make it make sense, in my opinion. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion, and I pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you feel like, enough is enough, let's stop doing the Sidney route? Do you think, you're right, if it'll work if there's this grand kind of story, right? Like, the only way I see you really getting a trilogy out of this and making it make sense is if you basically have this be part 1 of 3 parts. Here's part 1, here's Sidney and Gale and the story we're setting up and establishing, and then this is going to transition and carry over into the next, and so on and so forth. If you do something like that, then yes, I'm on board, I'm behind it, I get it, let's go. But if this is just going to be here's this Scream movie, and then the next one's just going to be its own thing, and the next one's going to be... Again, how many times can you do that? How many times can we keep doing that with Sidney Prescott? But, again, however you feel, whatever your thoughts are, let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. Helps me enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.